Thank you for joining us on this ministry. We send you New Year's greetings for 2008. And in this little segment of our ministry, we're going to look at three important cardinals of the 20th century. Cardinal Jozsef Mindszenty, Cardinal Stefan Wyszynski, and Cardinal John Carmel of Westminster. Well, we start today with the Hungarian Cardinal Jozsef Mindszenty. Incidentally, his real name was Joseph Pem, or I've seen it sometimes pronounced as Joseph Prem. He was born in Hungary of peasant stock, devout Catholics apparently, and it was noted by his mother that he would be an ideal candidate of the priesthood, and it looks like his local bishop agreed, because he went to the seminary, he was spotted by the bishop, and he seems to have moved quite quickly through the ranks. In 1944 he was arrested by the occupying forces in Hungary at the time, the Germans, and he spent 10 months in prison. I suppose it was a taste of what was to come under the Communists. He was released at the end of the war in 1945. There was a brief truce, but by then Stalin was tightening his grip on Eastern Europe, and Hungary was in his sights. Under Gomulka, the communist leader who had been trained in Moscow, Jozsef Mindszenty was in his sights. By then he was the Archbishop of Budapest. He was arrested in 1948 and taken to the prisons to be interrogated. All of this can be found in his little book here, and I'll just hold it up for you. This gives a full account of his arrest, his interrogation, his abuse of human rights, and how he was physically tortured and mentally tortured. It's a very hard to come by little book, this. I got it about 12 years ago, but it's a remarkable book, and it does give a lot of his period, of his memoirs of when he was in prison under communists for about 8 or 9 years. I think he left a lot out. But he was arrested in 1948. There was a show trial a year later. He was tortured, we're told that. He was abused. He was deprived of his civil liberties and so forth. Some very strange instances are recorded in the book of how he was dressed as a clown. And one morning he woke up in his clown's outfit with a couple of beefy Hungarian warders come in who decided to give him a good kicking. A few days later, another tall Hungarian prison warder came in with a riding crop, who then tried to ride him around the cell whilst he starts whipping him on the buttocks with this riding crop. What it was all about, I have no idea. He also records in his prison memoirs of how some prostitutes were brought in, again while he was dressed as a clown. What all that was about, I have no idea. Whether there was some sexual motive here by the guards or the warders, I don't know. But he was brought to trial in 1948. All of this physical torture seems to have changed with the introduction of mind-bending, hallucinating drugs. Probably LSD, probably some other concoction that the SS had used, which the KGB had got, and who better to try it out than Cardinal Jozsef Mindszenty. By the time he arrived at his show trial, as the photographs you can show him, he has that haunted look in his eye, a look of desperation. He's as thin as a scarecrow, and he stands trial, accused of being, amongst other things, a spy for the CIA, for the American government and so forth. Well, he's found guilty, naturally, and then he begins his very long prison sentence. He's moved around from different prisons. From 1949 and 1956 he is incarcerated. 1956 the winds of change are starting to sweep through Europe. Stalin's gone, Khrushchev's come in, and we see the famous Hungarian uprising of 1956. I remember this very well. I was living in South London at the time. He is released from prison on the wave of support by the Hungarian people. There's a famous picture of him standing on a tank. However, freedom for Hungary is shortly lived, because within a few weeks the Russians come back with a vengeance and they tighten the grip, and the Cardinal has to seek political asylum in the United States Embassy in Budapest, and there he stayed for some 15 years. Whilst he was there, they converted the top floor for him. He had some simple living conditions there. Apparently he had visitors who'd come from the Secretary of State's office. The winds of change also changed the Catholic Church after Vatican II. The Church, in my opinion, had moved very much to the left under people like Cardinal Casaroli, who many thought possibly was a KGB agent, Paul VI, who was a man who was vacillated in what he could do and make his mind up and so forth. But by 1971, after 15 years, the Vatican wanted Mindszenty out. They wanted to put a new man in, and they thought he should go. And I think various envoys from the Vatican came back and forth, and he left. Still as Cardinal Mindszenty, still as the Cardinal of Budapest, but the Vatican didn't want it. They wanted him to resign his post. He refused to do this. He started saying then that he thought communism or Marxism had infiltrated the Catholic Church. We now know that records released in the year 2001 An amazing 7 out of 9 Hungarian bishops who attended the Second Vatican Council were in the pay of the Hungarian secret police. Wow, 7 out of 9. Wonders how they didn't get the other 2. He was released in 1971. He died in 1975, and during those few years of freedom he jetted around the world, became an institution to many of the Hungarians who had left under the communism. He was eventually stripped of his title of Archbishop of Budapest by Paul VI. He became a private citizen. Cardinal Mindszenty died in 1975. He died in Vienna. He was buried in Vienna, and with the fall of the Berlin Wall he was brought back to Hungary, where he was buried in Hungary, a rightful place for a rightful man. He was an icon of the Hungarian people, very brave man. I've always had an attachment to Cardinal Mindszenty. We actually share the same birthday, but I think he was one of the icons of the Hungarian Revolution, an icon for so many Hungarians that I used to know in South London. I'd like to move forward to 1990, when I read in the English papers that the European Union were putting forward a sum of money to amateur filmmakers. Although I wasn't an amateur filmmaker, I had an interest in filmmaking as such, for a project or a topic which would be of interest to European viewers, and I thought straight away of Cardinal Jozsef Mindszenty. There had been nothing made of the man except a very brief B film in the 1950s. So I formed a little company called GP Films. We actually got as far as making up some storyboards to send to them, and if the camera can pan in on, you'll see some of them here. You can see GP Films Limited. There was the title there. These were some of the boards which I had photocopied and sent to them. There's that one there, and there's another one there. Just a little sort of mock storyboard to send to them, give them some idea of the flavour. But I wanted something running through it, not so much on Mindszenty, what was happening there, and I sat down to write a script, if I could, not only on him and this series of hallucinating drugs that were used upon him, but I wanted to use the story of 2 young people, and this caught my imagination from a photograph at the time, and I read soon afterwards, this young couple here, fired up with hope, with the Russians gone, of a free Hungary, were killed in the fighting soon afterwards. Mindszenty was a hero to them. Well, for various reasons he didn't get the grant. I'm not too worried about not getting it, because it seems that nobody got a grant really, and if they did it was for perhaps for more secular issues. So that's the story of Cardinal Jozsef Mindszenty that we're telling you about. Just like to wind things up by now, wishing you a happy new year. We hope you've enjoyed this. Remarkable man, Mindszenty. He stood for freedom. Unfortunately he wasn't born again as we would hope. Unfortunately he stayed in the Catholic Church, and I think in some ways he backed the wrong side. He was a Pius XII man, he wasn't a John the 23rd man, and he wasn't a Paul VI man. A man who went through all of this, and we'll never really know what happened in those prison years. It must have been quite horrific. I suspect that he didn't tell a lot in the book, but he came out of it quite a humble man. He seems to have no bitterness at all. He said he forgave all of his enemies, and I suspect he probably did. I think if he hadn't been a cardinal, hadn't been a Roman Catholic, he'd have been a unique Christian. But story of Jozsef Mindszenty, the hero of Hungary, a man who I felt a story should be made, and perhaps one day someone else will make the film. If you've heard of this man, you know anything about him, please let us know. Until then, thank you, and Maranatha.